Okay, I think we will get started. We might still have some people trickling in, but we want to maximize our time tonight. So good evening, everyone. My name is Stephanie Mitchell, and I'm an educational consultant specializing in working with neurodivergent students in boarding school placement and college advising. I'm a partner with the Bertram Group and a board member of Smart Kids with Learning Disabilities. I am delighted to welcome you tonight to hear our panel discussion on navigating post-secondary planning for students with learning differences. Tonight's program is brought to you by Smart Kids with Learning Disabilities and our co-sponsor, the New Canaan Library, which is graciously hosting and recording this event. A few words about Smart Kids, and then I'll have our panelists introduce themselves and their programs. Smart Kids with Learning Differences is a nonprofit organization based in Norwalk, serving families in Connecticut and throughout the country. Our goal is to empower the parents of the 1 to 5 children with learning and attention differences to help their kids succeed. We provide constantly updated, free, and award-winning digital resources, including a monthly newsletter with close to 11,000 subscribers, a weekly blog, and a comprehensive website with hundreds of parent-friendly, action-oriented articles at smartkidswithld.org. We provide educational programs with leading experts, both in person and online. Our well-attended parent conference was held last month at Sacred Heart University with keynote address given by Dr. Margie Gillis, the founder and president of Literacy How, and a nationally recognized literacy expert. You can find the recording on our YouTube channel. It was excellent. We've also developed the research-based Countdown to Kindergarten Early Literacy and SEL Skills programs, which are being delivered in preschools in vulnerable communities throughout the area. Every year, we celebrate the outstanding achievements of young people with learning and attention differences with the Fred J. Epstein Youth Achievement Awards. You can see some of our past winners here who have made a lasting impact on their schools and communities and are poised to go on to bigger and better achievements. We'll be honoring this year's winners at our 25th anniversary Minds in Bloom Gala on April 10th. If you'd like more information, please scan the QR code or talk to our program and event manager, who will be located at the table over there as she's with us this evening. I am delighted to welcome you to tonight's program. I will be serving as the moderator this evening with this incredible group of passionate educators and experts. I will have each panelist introduce themselves and briefly describe the programs they represent, and then we'll jump right in. And we'll leave some time at the end for questions.
Okay. Well, I'm delighted to be here tonight. My name is Sarah Hannigan, and I am the coordinator of the SAIL program at Curry College in Milton, Massachusetts. The SAIL program stands for Social Achievement in Learning, and it's a new socially supportive program that we've developed to support students with autism and other social learning needs to thrive in the college environment. So it's been a wonderful addition to Curry College's programming. I'm a speech-language pathologist by background, so I'm bringing that skill set to the program development and support of students.
By the way, I think that it's been confirmed that Sarah is the first full-time speech-language pathologist to operate this kind of program in higher ed. So it's a big,
as far as we know,
it's a big moment in higher ed where we're recognizing the needs and the talents of speech-language pathologists to continue to support the transition for students that were receiving those services in K-12. So my name's Nicole Parsons. I have the pleasure of working with Sarah at Curry College. I'm the co-director and an associate professor in the Program for Advancement of Learning, also known as PAL. Some of you have probably heard of it. It's been around for about 55 years now. And it was founded well before its time because the PAL program was established well before special education, well before we had the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I have the privilege of working with a lot of folks that have been around since day one, and they've been incredible mentors. But a lot has changed since special ed. A lot has evolved, and there's lots of options now for parents. So you have plenty of options. We're not the only program in town anymore. So thank you. I'm excited to have this conversation with you all tonight.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Morsewood. I'm the head of school at Franklin Academy, which is a boarding school, grades 8 through 12 in East Haddam for neurodivergent learners. We also have a postgraduate program, so really working on scaffolded introduction to college or career, a summer program. I've worked with a lot of these colleagues. I was in higher ed prior as the vice president at Beacon College in Florida, and I proudly serve as the chair of the Special Interest Group for Disabilities and Neurodiversity for the National Association of College and Mission Counselors. So great to be here. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ted Donahue. I am the Associate Director of Accessibility Services at Southern Connecticut State University in New Haven. I work out of an office known as CASAS, the Center for Academic Success and Accessibility Services. I just want to make a plug for that or explain what we do there. So in addition to accommodations and accessibility work, we also provide a number of programs to support students with learning differences. We have programs, we have academic success coaching to help strengthen students' executive functioning skills. We do tutoring through our office. We do something called PALS, Peer Academic Leaders, which is a small group study sessions. We have a program called MAP, which is the Mentor Academic Partnership, which really targets students with an autism profile. And it works on social skills, task management, other executive functioning skills. We also work closely with our communication disorders clinic on campus. So some of our students will receive support through that. The MAP program is actually co-operated with the CMD lab. We have an audiology lab. We have something called the CEAT lab, the Center for Educational and Assistive Technology. So all of those we work very, very closely with. So we like it at CASAS, we like to say we're one-stop shopping for all students.
Wonderful, thank you. So I want to start with some questions that are actually related to the transition process and all the things that I work with families to think about as they're engaging in this conversation. So Alex, can you talk a little bit about how parents can truly assess the support and accommodations that their child receives in high school in order to determine what the need might be in a post-secondary setting?
Yeah, sure. I think the accommodation process is probably a little easier to navigate. Typically that is talked about pretty directly in IEP meetings. The best thing that I could really advise is not so much to worry just about the accommodations, but really focusing on the unspoken support that is typically embedded in special education or specialized education, things like modifications. So often I see parents and students not aware of how their educational environment has been modified. Or how that unique teacher that just gets your kid knows how to differentiate instruction to support them, and that student and that family is thinking that's going to be generalized to higher education. So often what I tell families is, yes, start with the IEP, start with a 504 plan, think about those accommodations. A lot of them will carry over to college, and having that conversation is really important. What is 10 times more important is the unspoken rules and things that are happening in the classroom. Things like no consequences for turning in homework assignments late or not at all. Not having homework, that happens too. Not having to write a paper and they're doing a presentation instead. Waivers for classes, all of these things that have been created to remove the barriers to make education more accessible does not happen in college. There are no modifications in higher education. And that leap to me is the hardest one to prepare for, and it's often the one that's not talked about in your transition meetings at all. So start with the unspoken modifications before you worry about the accommodations.
In a little while, we're going to talk about the laws and how they change from high school to college. So that's coming in a little bit. Nicole, is there anything you wanted to add?
I was going to mention that because the law thing really ties into this, but we can wait. So in my role for the program for advancement of learning, which I really didn't do a great job at describing, I'm sorry, but it is it's an academic program that provides a comprehensive level of support to students that have cognitive variances like ADHD. And most of our students, 70% of our students have ADHD. There's a lot of comorbidities, so we have students with psychological challenges in addition to learning challenges. And we provide support for the academic side of things. We have seen a shift in students that would require some social support, and that's why we developed the SAIL program. And students have the option to dually enroll if they want social and academic support, but we do support from different angles. So in the admission process, what we're looking for is students that we can support. So if their primary and only disability is psychological or social, then we might feel that we're not the right fit. We're seeing a lot of students that are coming from therapeutic programs that are providing a very specialized therapeutic type of support. Again, that's not something that we would feel that we would be able to adequately support. The admission process is getting more challenging for us because students provide their neuropsych, so their cognitive and their achievement testing, and we use that information to ensure that the students would be able to access the curriculum without having any modified work. And it's true that oftentimes students are getting modifications and they don't know. And how that has become a challenge is that we're seeing now that they're actually being placed into classes that are coded college prep and honors classes, and they're co-taught by special and gen ed, and they're actually not doing college level work because they have an IEP that says that they're doing work at their level. And we'll talk about that in the legal shifts, but colleges don't have to provide that level of guarantee for success in higher ed. And we only have to follow ADA, which means that we're actually not legally allowed to modify their curriculum. We're also seeing students that come from like really great programs that spark creativity, and they have a lot of project-based learning, but then they get to college and they have to take exams and they've never taken an exam before. So those are good ways to prepare your child for college, is like preparing them for the shift in their reality that there is a shift, especially in the accommodations. And the biggest area that they can focus on is self-advocacy, because I don't see any students in this room. I see a lot of parents. I see one. Okay, but the ownership is on the student when they get to college, and they oftentimes come to college with a lot of support, which has been great, getting them to where they are. But then they have to learn to navigate there on their own, and that's why it's really important to choose a college that has the right level of support, so that it's easy to navigate that situation, and also to have the self-advocacy skills that are required to be able to do that successfully.
Thank you. And that actually, did you want to add something?
I just want to add one piece about advocacy that would apply to both academic areas and non-academic areas. So those advocacy skills that span the whole life cycle of a college student.
Res life, right?
Yes, yeah.
Exactly.
I'll just give you one example, so you have a real example of what we mean by that. If you have an IEP or a 504 and you have extended time in high school, that's embedded in your curriculum. So that means that you just automatically get extended time. It carries with you, every class, every teacher, you don't have to do anything. When you get to college, you have to fill out a form through Office of Accessibility Services, or if you're in a program like PAL with your PAL professor, you have to do it for each class, each semester. And then after you do that, you also have to request, whatever their process is for requesting it, 5 days before each exam. One class might have 5 exams, another class might have 3 exams. Like, you have to keep track of all the exams and then make the request to take the exam with the extended time. And no one's doing that for you. So it's like each semester, each week, it's constant. And that's a big, big leap from it's done for you automatically without even thinking about it. So.
And especially when I'm working with students with executive function challenges, imagine what that looks like when you have to keep track of not only an exam coming up, but doing those notifications ahead of time. It's like an extra layer. Thank you for that. And some of the comments that you were making me think a lot about the student's learning profile and the student and parents understanding their learning profile really well when considering their post-secondary options. So if you could, Nicole, if you want to start by describing what a learning profile is, and why it's important to solidify an understanding of a student's areas of academic and social strengths and weaknesses when considering post-secondary education.
All right, I'll try. This is a big question because everyone's learning profile is different, and that's what's so special about special education. And in our program, we say that we individualize instruction based on the student's need. So it's important to understand the profile because it's important to understand what types of supports the student needs when they go to college. That's why we distinguish between social and academic. So colleges have really started to understand that there's a diversity of needs of students when they enter higher ed. When our program started 55 years ago, we were known as a language-based program. And all the students that came to PAL, people still call us a language-based program. Well, there's like 6% of our students that are language-based now. So we're not a language-based program anymore. But higher ed has seen other shifts in enrollment. We've seen a dramatic shift in students that are entering with autism. These students have different needs. They don't have the same needs as those language-based students that first started coming to college. So programs aren't designed for them. And I think there's an automatic sometimes, people just believe that, okay, this is a program that supports students that learn different, so they support all students. But there are programs that have specialties. And there are programs that meet specific needs, and not all program meets every need. So it's important to understand the learning profile, to understand, is it academic? Is it social? Is it psychological? Does the student have self-advocacy skills? Does the student have the skills to be able to be successful in college using those accommodations and navigating Office of Accessibility Services? Or do they need a deeper level of support? Do they need a more comprehensive level like the PAL program? Or maybe their self-advocacy skills are so strong that they can access Office of Accessibility Services and then all the other free services that our college provides, like tutoring and the Writing Center. And they might, every college has different supports. So there's fee-based, there's free supports, there's the basic Office of Accessibility Services that every college is required by law to provide. And then there's the more comprehensive, and then there's a difference between social and academic. Now, about 50% of students that have a learning difference also have some sort of coexisting anxiety, depression, OCD. That oftentimes is best met if there's some psychological challenge outside of the college. The colleges in this country have not been, rose to the occasion of doing a really good job at supporting that. Every university will have a counseling center, and the counseling center will meet with students, and they will provide support for students that are experiencing a need that's happening in the moment. But if it's something deeper, they usually try to outsource. And it's just important to know that, if there's comorbidities, then sometimes you're looking for supports you're looking for the right support at the college that will support the academic, social, and the specific level, but you also might need to have external supports too that are in place that the college doesn't provide. So, yes, an example would be that, so oftentimes, okay, so an example would be, I'll use myself. Nicole applied to PAL. And Sarah was looking at my file and wondering, are we going to be able to support this student? Because Nicole's primary diagnosis is psychological. She has depression, she has anxiety, she has OCD, but she also has ADHD. And we can provide support for the ADHD, right? But we wonder how this student's going to be successful if all of this documentation says that the primary disability is psychological. That means that has to be, those needs need to be met first in order for that, or in order for me, because I'm talking about myself as the example, to be able to access the academic supports. So it's really important to know what it is that's getting in the way of the student's learning, and that's why it's important to understand the learning profile. And it can be very complex. And oftentimes, you know, if it's something that's psychological and academic, true success will happen if you're addressing both of them. And colleges really aren't ready to address the psychological part. But it's a huge piece that becomes a big barrier for students, especially with all of the challenges and stress that can happen with the transition to college. And the shift is big. It's a huge shift. And there are summer programs and different, you know, students can take a gap year or a PG year and try to prepare better, but it's a big shift, and it is important to recognize exactly what it is that the student needs to be successful.
Thank you. So we've talked about assessing the support and accommodations that a student is receiving, developing their learning profile. Alex, can you talk a little bit about some ideas for how parents and students can collaborate with their high school to ensure sufficient preparation for the smooth transition?
Yeah, I think, you know, when I think about college, think about it as like a foreign language, right? This new country that you have to go to. You've never heard of things like FERPA and SAP and all of these acronyms that you're just going to be inundated with. And you have to learn the language of college. And the best way to learn language is through immersion. And so scaffolded immersion into the language of college is going to be really important. So partnering with your high school on things like experiential learning opportunities like summer programs or bridge programs is one great way to assess the student in a brand new environment. They're really comfortable where they are. Their school has been created for them to be comfortable. But what happens when you remove them from the routine, from the predictability, and then you ask them to employ all of those skills, the executive functioning skills like planning and prioritizing and time management and shifting and problem solving in this new territory, this whole new foreign country. So asking your high school to provide your student true experiential learning opportunities is critical. You just heard Nicole talk about the steps of advocacy to get something as simple as extended time. Asking them, how can we introduce that skill now to evaluate how my child will be able to meet those skill demands? And they're going to say, they don't have to, we don't have to worry about that. And you say back, no, they have to practice these skills now while they have this safety net of all of these great professionals that are there to support them. So my first suggestion is always to start with the experiential learning. We learn best by context. The second thing is really to ask some of those more critical questions with your child hopefully present around all of the skills that really will impede on the college transition. Most often, executive functioning skills are not part of IEP goals. They're not measured. They are just assumed that students are going to develop over time. So asking about students creating their own organizational toolkit to self-manage their work. You know, technology is great, but I miss the days of like binders and color-coded notebooks and my agenda book. I relied on myself to know what my demands were. Technology now has given that to students, so they're relying on technology to be their executive functioning tool. Then they're going to go to these great colleges, and no professor is going to do it the same way. So you go for like 15 years, and you're like, all right, Miss Jones, Miss Smith, Mr. whatever your name is, are all going to post their assignments on this day. I'm going to get a reminder when it's due. I'm going to ping the parent so that you get reminders that the kid has not done their work, so that you become more of their executive functioning toolkit. And then they're going to go to college, and one professor is going to post the syllabus. One professor is going to be amazing and post like all of these videos. Another professor might totally forget that Canvas exists. And if the student does not have the self-developed skills that are often never talked about in school, they're not going to be able to survive college. So again, it goes back to that special education is wonderful because it provides in writing all of these things. Unfortunately, college thinks about everything else. Things like self-regulation, self-management, emotional control, your ability to shift and problem solve. So the best way that we all learn is by doing it first. The earlier that you can intervene, the earlier you could start, the better. There's great summer programs out there, everything from a college-like experience, going to a college just to live there to get context, college immersion programs, pre-college programs. To me, a lot of times we focus a lot of summer on work experience. Our students need college experience. And I know that's expensive, but I just got a great email from one program that's giving scholarships. So really doing your homework now and preparing between December and February for your summer is really key. And happy to talk about that at any time.
Would you say one of the ways to have this immersive education while still in the high school building could be attending a PPT meeting?
Yeah, it's attending a PPT meeting and participating,
yeah.
right? The steps of it, right? First step is having the child sit through the entire meeting, which is already uncomfortable. Like nobody wants to sit in a room and be like, this is what you're not good at, by the way. It's not even like, here's a strength. Let's talk about all of the times you don't meet the intervals. It's not a fun thing for anybody, let alone a 17-year-old. So sitting through it, really working on distress tolerance skills. Again, those psychological coping strategies that are so important. And then say, your next PPT meeting, you're going to reflect on one thing that you did really well in this year. And really please focus on strengths because unfortunately we're in a deficit-based model. If our students can really identify what they're doing well on, that's gonna help them build their resiliency when they go to college and they are just advocating for support. Another great way to immerse yourself into college, shameless plug, is to go to a boarding school that's for college prep students. And I joke around it because a lot of what we're seeing now in higher education is the concern about after 4 o'clock. Once the routine and the structure of the academic day ends and the office is closed, who's going to be available to support them? And you don't want it to be all of you all the time, right? And unfortunately, college offices close at 5 o'clock. And so you really have to develop a lot of those independent living skills, which is really about adapting to new environments, engaging, and the most important thing when we're thinking about a profile is a student's ability to perform and meet the demands, because at the end of the day, that's how they're going to be measured. And how they get to that level is through experiential learning opportunities and exposure to the language of college.
Thank you. So we've been kind of touching on this idea of the shift in the laws. So Ted, would you talk a little bit about the differences in the laws that protect students in high school and college?
They're huge. Yeah, that's the bottom line. So IDEA goes away. That's the first thing you need to know. We are governed at the college level by the Americans with Disability Act, depending if you're public or private, title part 1, part 2, or part 3, but also more specifically by Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. And Section 504 has very clear language that applies to higher education, that cannot discriminate against a qualified student with a disability. And I want to come back to that term, qualified student with a disability, because that's a big deal. So, because IDEA goes away, I was sort of jotting down some things that go away with it. No PPTs, no annual meetings, no FAPE. FAPE is a legal standard that Public school districts have to provide a free and appropriate public education. There's no right to certainly no right to a free or appropriate higher education, okay? So that goes away. There's no child fine responsibility. So right now, under IDA, districts have to seek out and evaluate a student if they suspect a disability. That goes away. The district has to evaluate the students at its own expense. That goes away. Let's see. There are going to be no annual goals, no progress reports. Really, as Alex, I think, articulated really, really well, the burden now, the good news is the burden comes off you. The bad news is the burden comes off you. But it is up to the student. The student is the driver of the car. The student is the one who makes all decisions related to accessibility and accommodations and all of that. They are the ultimate decision maker. Parent involvement really scales way back, okay? There's no right to have regular updates or communication from a faculty member, okay? Now, that being said, it's really scary, okay? But there are things that, well, I don't know, we'll talk about this later, things that you can help your child prepare for. One thing I would recommend, because I was thinking about, Nicole, what you had said and what was said before, I think the roadmap really is on the State Department of Education's website. It is the Connecticut Transition Standards. If you want to see what really we're talking about for successful transition, ask yourself, to what extent does my child meet these standards? And how can I work with my school district to help ensure that? Because you'll see it is completely laden with self-advocacy, executive functioning, independence, awareness of why a student has a disability and what accommodations have worked well in the past, what accommodations don't work. That is such a valuable roadmap, so I would really encourage you to take a look at that. And then, and share that with the student, share that with your child. Ask them what they think. Yes? Sure, it's the under the Connecticut State Department of Education, it's the Connecticut Transition Standards. So a lot of those legal protections and processes and information sharing that you may be used to under IDEA really go away, okay? The law is that under Section 504 and the ADA, we can't discriminate against students with disabilities. Section 504 goes further, and it says that we cannot discriminate against a qualified student with a disability. A qualified student with a disability is a student with a disability who, with or without accommodations, can meet the institution's academic standards and technical standards. Technical standards are things that, the academic standards are going to be, it's the essential academic standards and the essential technical standards. Technical standards would be, for example, like for students in a nursing program, they have to be able to demonstrate that they can administer a syringe properly. That is the driver, okay? So what our goal is always to help students become qualified.
And I would add admissions criteria. They have to meet the same admissions criteria as every other student applying for the school. That's really an important.
And one key piece, because we, at our admissions level, we do not, students do not have to disclose a disability. They do not provide, at the admissions level, they don't provide IEPs, 504s, evaluations, any of that stuff, okay? So it's kind of a blind admission. I think you made a really good point, because admissions is gonna be looking at the transcript, and they're seeing college prep, maybe honors, sometimes advanced placement, all that. But when they see some of those classes and grades, the grades may not actually reflect what the student knows and is able to demonstrate. Okay, so we got to be really careful because you're dealing, like at Southern, we have 9,000 students, you have thousands of applications coming in, and they cannot go in that level of detail with students about show me this, show me that. Okay.
Yeah, it's.
Yeah. Yeah, and a student has every right to disclose that. We can't ask, okay? And we can't mandate. Typically, admissions is not going to. It wouldn't know what to do with the evaluations. They're going to send them to me, and I would wait for a student to call me. Yep.
Can you
So that's
repeat
good.
the question, Ted?
Oh, yeah, the question was about students who might need medication and what's the college's responsibility for that. The onus is going to be pretty much on the student to self-administer, okay? Now, that being said, I would encourage you when you're thinking about colleges or you've narrowed down the colleges to reach out to student health services or our office because we know that some medical treatments are a little trickier than others. And sometimes there's a little bit of a workaround. But again, it all goes back to trying to promote independence. Okay. Yeah. I'd be happy to talk to you more particularly after.
I think it's important to recognize that people with disabilities is not a frequently covered area of professional development in college admission counseling. So if you look at the textbook alone, we were given a mini chapter, for example, on how to support people with all disabilities, right? So a college admission officer is not going to be able to give you the specific details. They're going to really try to encourage the application, make you feel welcome. They're going to connect you with resources, but the granular questions around accessibility, student profiles, understanding transcripts, how it relates to the curriculum, that really is best in programs like scheduling, trying to schedule a meeting with a fee-based program or accessibility office, because very honestly, a 25-year-old college admission counselor is just not going to know what to do with that specific of an information. It's a really complicated question for them to think through, and a lot of it, like you said, as somebody who ran an admissions office, I saw transcripts that were all over the place. Grade inflation is very common. So it's really critical that when you're talking to your counselor, ask them, what would a college admission officer see when they see the transcript? How would they actually interpret this? I did a really fun activity with Ed Consultants where I showed them a college, high school transcript to see what their perspectives were. Because I think it's really important that you team up with people to help ensure that whatever is being done in writing is accurately transferred into the college sector.
Thank you. So we've been talking really in detail about these laws and how all of this changes. So that has a direct impact on students who need academic and or social supports in college. And Sarah, could you talk a little bit about the differences between academic or social support and the accommodations that we've been talking about and how they're two separate things?
Absolutely. And I would first like to start to just touch on that medication question because that's actually one of I run a socially supportive program. So we provide supports for the downtime, right? So if PAL supports, at Curry supports the academic components of a student's life, SAIL supports the rest of the time. So we work on executive functioning skills and building problem solving and self-advocacy and applying them while on a college campus. But we often have families ask, Will there be support for my student to take their medication? Will there be support for my student to complete activities of daily living? And even in our socially supportive program, the answer is no. There are not ADL supports, and there are not supports for taking medication. So when you're thinking of preparing your student for independent living, practicing taking your medication every day, practicing ordering a refill, those types of skills, your student will need to come ready to have them in the college environment. And that's even in a program that's designed to support students who have those sorts of executive function and social challenges. So the accommodation piece is something that's legally required, but when we're looking at a socially supportive program, that's something that's a fee-based program in our setting and in most of the other socially supportive programs that are on offer. So in enrolling in a program, your student may receive something like a lower sensory housing option. That's really common. Your student may receive things like mentoring support and being matched with a mentor who's maybe skilled in supporting students with neurodiversity or neurodivergence. Things like social coaching. So students in our program receive social coaching from a licensed speech language pathologist. Other programs have coaching from trained coaches or advisors. And things like structured social opportunities. So we have some small group structured social opportunities on offer in our program. That's something that wouldn't be an accommodation because it's not helping them access their educational environment. That's something that's going beyond and helping students to build out their social skills while on a college campus. Other aspects would be things like early move-in and a little bit of executive function training before other students are getting to campus so that there's a quieter, easier transition. And that's something that's built into our program and many others as well. But there's still no progress reporting. Those things that you've kind of become accustomed to from special education in K to 12 don't apply in higher education. So that's a learning curve for parents. We talked a little bit about contact with parents. That's not an accommodation, so your student is still entitled to their protections and privacies under FERPA. And in our socially supportive program and academic programs, there's perhaps a slight increase in contact with a support person from the program, but it's not a daily check-in, right? If something is going on at home, you're able to reach out to somebody from the program and maybe let them know, but you're not getting a daily update of how things are going. So there's just a level of independence that starts from day one. That's a transition for a lot of families. I see a question. Great, that's a great question. So the question was, yeah, if there's support in the evening. So I can talk about how our program is structured. Other programs are structured differently, but I think it's more common to follow the structure that we have, which is a business hours model. So program staff is present during business hours, during Monday to Friday hours. Sometimes we have some programming on the weekend, but it would be a special event, or in the evening, same thing, it would be some special programming. In overnight hours, there's a community director, we call that at our campus. There's other campuses call it a different name sometimes, but there's somebody on call, so the students can call a number, and public safety is always available 24/7. But the programming is a business hours model.
That's a really good question.
Yeah, great question. Yes, I see another question. That's a great question. I can speak to that a little bit. In terms of my program, we can hear from others as well. But many of our students in our SAIL program are have either done a gap year, have lived at home and taken classes at a community college or through some of the other online resources. So we have several students who are a bit older. I have not seen that as a barrier in any way. I'm seeing the social relationships develop between a 20-year-old student and an 18-year-old student in sort of an organic way. That hasn't really been a barrier.
I just want to repeat the question so everybody could hear it. It's about students who are not quite ready at 18 to transition to college. Once they're ready in their 20, early 20s, can they find their social cohort at the college level? And I would add to that I think in the post-COVID world, that is much, much more common today. So I think the average, I don't actually have a statistic about this, but I think this average starting age and average college age, because kids are also taking longer in college, has gotten to an older window. So I don't think you would find that that's super uncommon.
And it doesn't discriminate against in terms of disability or not. I just did a training at a college, and social isolation is the #1 cause of concern at college campuses right now. The traditional ways of social motivation and getting students bought into programming, the old stuff isn't working like it used to. So higher ed is really in this interesting pivot of figuring out how do we re-engage students to form community. And I think programs that really cater to students who are neurodivergent have the leg up, because that's always been one of our underpinning goals. So they're likely going to form community because that is the ethos of what starts all of our programs. And then from there, we're building the skills. But I will say, like, it is a really sad thing when you talk to a lot of colleges. This is across the United States of how do we engage students back to community and refrain from isolation that's typically caused by COVID.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I want to kind of move backwards a little bit just to really concretely answer this question. So when we're talking with parents and students about whether or not they'd benefit from a support program versus being able to survive and thrive in college on accommodations alone, how can we help them to make that determination? Would you speak to that, Alex?
I look at just frequency and intensity of support. So how often, how much support does the student require to meet benchmarks, both in structured environments and in the home? And I think the home is even more important. What are you doing to support how your child functions to meet daily living expectations, academic expectations? Is the student aware that you're helping them or that you're cueing them? That little prompt, they have to really be aware of that, because all of that goes away. Asking the student to be able to describe their disability and how it limits them would tell me whether or not they could go through that accommodation process, which I don't know, at 40, I don't think I could still do that. It's tricky, right? Do they have the executive functioning skills to self-regulate through a really annoying process, right? But do they understand the why behind it, right? You can't just say, I have ADHD, I want extended time. You have to be able to explain what your ADHD kind of looks like, how it impacts you, and why that accommodation is going to be helpful and how you used it before. A lot of that self-awareness is really critical. But frequency and intensity, I think, is an easy measure to really identify, do they need daytime programming and support, which I would say most people probably honestly do, or can they rely solely on accommodations? I would also say, given, as Nicole talked about, like a lot of the co-occurring stuff going on with mental health, we should not shame for the fact that most people will need more resources. Having a therapist on hand, having an executive functioning coach, having a life coach or a social coach, that should be now okay, destigmatized, and kind of part of the daily transition for most people going to college at 18 or 19 years old. Yeah. Mm-hmm. They might. Yeah.
Maybe I could address this one, because this comes up quite a bit. Having a diagnosis is one piece of the puzzle. By law, we are required to consider each student individually. And it's what we call an interactive process. So that means I can't say, this student has autism, so these are our autism accommodations. That's not allowed under the law. It has to be based on what does the student need. The questions we look at, I was just talking to some of our staff about this, is impact, as Alex mentioned. That is the biggest thing, because a student with ADHD is a student with ADHD. The impact could be very different. What we have to understand from an accessibility point of view is what's the impact? That is, what are the functional limitations, the student's disability? And sometimes I will say to students, the condition, because a lot of students who are neurodivergent do not identify as having a disability, and that's fine. So I want to be inclusive of that. What are those functional limitations in a college setting? And then what are the barriers for them to be able to access their education? I just want to go back to what Nicole said. IDEA is all about setting students up for success. 504 and the ADA is all about access. You have to be a qualified student with a disability, so there's no guarantee of success, okay? When we look at accommodations, we want to understand, are they directly connected to the impact? Would they help to remove or at least reduce that barrier to access? Are they necessary, appropriate, and reasonable? And this is a big one. Would they result in a fundamental alteration of a program or of an essential program standard or an essential technical standard that I mentioned before? If that's the case, we may not be able to provide that accommodation.
I can say something though, how it's different if you're not using Office of Accessibility Services. So that's a level of support that's available to all students. But then there are more comprehensive levels. So our program would be a program that would be appropriate fit for a student who's not able to do that yet. And what our faculty do when they meet with students for the first time are they have conversations about the learning profile. And together, the professor and the student look at the diagnostic testing. They talk about things like working memory and processing speed and what that means. They talk about different assistive technologies or AI tools that can be successful in leveraging supports. Whether the student was on an IEP or a 504 and what type of support they were receiving in high school. And they do get one-on-one support with all of this stuff in terms of figuring out or learning how to describe their learning difference, learning how to describe how they learn different, what their strengths are, what accommodations would be successful for them. They do it all 4 years if they stay in PAL for 4 years. And they do have reminders to sign up for exams. You know, they don't have to go to Office of Accessibility Services. We provide the accommodations. And some students require them all 4 years. Some students might only need them the first year and then they figure it out and they're on their own after that. And there's no rush. It's different for every student. But even though we're telling you all this stuff, there are different levels of support. So if that level's not enough, then there is other levels. And there's also something in between.
I do want to just follow up on what I shared because I could see some of the panic in some people. The intake process, at least the intake process that we do, is typically going to be about a half an hour. And it's probably going to be myself or one of my colleagues, the student, and the student is more than welcome to have their parent. I personally prefer to have a parent there because I see a lot of under-reporting or minimizing issues. But I'm going to ask lots of questions. I know that students have language issues, memory issues, communication, sensory, all of that, mental health concerns with anxiety and speaking. We try to make it as absolutely comfortable as possible. And so we don't expect a student to get up and do a soliloquy about what's hard about it and what works. We just ask a lot of questions. Sometimes we'll ask one question and it will just flow from the student. And that's wonderful. But we also recognize that students are very different in how they present, their level of comfort. So we want to lower the heat. It's just a very casual conversation. So for example, what I like to do, I'll ask a student, I've already read any documentation they have provided, okay? So I'm familiar with kind of the questions I need to ask. So I will typically ask students, if I'm not getting information, I'll say, tell me a little bit about high school. What was hard for you? Sometimes they'll say, oh, nothing, I loved high school, no problem. Okay, so let's talk, all right, so let's talk about the classroom, okay? Is reading hard? No, I like to, okay. Do you ever have any issues? So many students don't know the term decoding, but do you ever have any issues sounding out the word, sounding out big words? What do you do when you see a big word and you have no understanding of what it is? Can you pronounce it? So we ask a lot of questions like that. Talk to me about writing. What's hard about that? Is it the physical act of writing or typing? Is it coming up with an idea? Is it making it flow? So we break it down a lot, because whether we're asking the question or the student is just offering it up, we will get to the same point. We really want to understand the ultimate goal is what's the impact. So I just want to clarify because I don't want you to think it's like this high performance thing. It's very low key.
I whispered to Stephanie earlier that I realized that we're sitting on a panel of people in colleges with an immense amount of support. It's a privilege to hear what you're talking about because I think it shows where accessibility needs to be. That is not what happens at all colleges, and I think the process is uniform. I did training at a state university down south, one disability officer for 10,000 students. So not everybody might have the 30 minutes, and what you do is tremendous, and I think if this could be the example for higher education, this would be exactly it. So listen to what was just talked about and start that process now. Ask your student, tell me about high school. What was hard about it? Talk about reading, talk about writing. The more we could do in that process now might safeguard if you go to a really big state university and you get 15 minutes or you're doing something virtually. It really will help tremendously.
And the other thing too is we also, depending on the profile of the student, and we may ask questions about what was hard about high school with other students. Is it hard to make friends? And that's what I call the heartbreak question because it always kills me because I know for so many of our students who come, they have gone for years with not really making a meaningful connection with a peer. So that's so important for me to know because I'm thinking, okay, what other things can I be doing? So I might be referring the student to the Office of Student Involvement. I might be referring the student to the MAP program to talk, I might be referring them to the CMD clinic, So we also talk a lot about that social piece because that is so important for college too.
I just wanted to I'm trying to give these experts all the voice because they're so amazing and they're in the day-to-day. But as a parent in this space and somebody who prepares kids for these conversations, I want you all to take a minute and imagine if your child has never read their neuropsych eval, if they're not clear on what their diagnoses are and how they manifest in their academic life, in their social life, in their life at home, those are really important conversations to be having right now. Because if you don't get a TED on the other side, they need to be, and imagine the person that they're talking to has read their eval. So if there's information in there that the student is not familiar with, that can be a really jarring conversation when they're having their first conversation with somebody on the college side. So that's really critically important. And I will also add that most colleges will not even have these conversations until the student is enrolled. So you want to do some really careful research ahead of time to try to sleuth out what they will be doing for students once there before you make that commitment.
It's also probably a wise choice to have the person who performed the cognitive testing explain with the parent and the student. Because if a parent doesn't have a background in cognitive assessment, they might be limited in their ability to really interpret the results in a way that does highlight the strengths, because that's what we try to do. And it can be an emotional process to have to sit and take one of those exams, especially if the student has had to take it every 3 years. And I can only imagine the kind of things that they might wonder about themselves when they have to take that exam. But there's also a lot of positive things that can come from it. And they can learn a lot of amazing things about their brain and how capable they are. And so the conversation in most cases for me with students is a really good one, a strong one that can be really motivating. So, and empowering when you really understand how your brain works, right? That's empowerment.